Do you ever ask one of these existential questions related to the Bible, like, why did God decide to do things when He did? I mean, we're here today. Why can't God send Christ here on earth today? Why can't we have prophets today that do all kinds of crazy, miraculous things so that we can, catch it on our phones and have news media talk about it and everything? I mean, wouldn't that be nice? Why did God choose to do things the way that He did? Well, none of us really know the answer to that, but there is a very interesting study that you can actually engage in that goes along with what God chooses to prioritize when it comes to communicating His will and His presence, His being to His creation versus the time periods in which He chose to actually do certain things. If you think about it, I mean, and really just boiling it down to its absolute simplest, the era and time in which Jesus Christ came to this earth was one in which it really leaves a lot of room for the message to be propagated throughout the entire world, but at the same time for there still to be an element of faith and perseverance. That is really important because that is very much how Christ actually chose to engage in His ministry here on earth. Take, for example, the verses that surround the story that goes along with the namesake of this sermon series. When you see the parable of the seeds and the sower, when you see this parable, it actually begins with an acknowledgement of these individuals that were following Christ, who were people that had experienced some kind of miraculous thing in their life. And so what you're seeing here is that Christ actually interacted with these individuals in a way that was metaphysical first, and then He started giving them teachings. Why would He do that? Why does Christ give miracles to some people but not other people? And what you find out is that it's all about communicating in this effective way that we will understand, but in a way that still leaves that window open for our own faith and perseverance to receive the message and to believe the message. You'll see this a little bit as you read the story yourself. And so take a moment and read in completion, this story and the events surrounding this story, and see how you can see those themes of faith and perseverance pop up over and over again. Now, the parable itself is interesting, and we will dig into that in just a second, but I want to, just for a little bit longer, look at why Christ chooses to speak in parables. I mean, He explains it in His own words here in this section. But if we were to take this and to maybe make it a little bit more just kind of common English for ourselves today, it would basically be this. Christ understands us. He understands how we understand things, how we perceive the world around us. And this is how God chooses to reveal Himself in a way that we will be able to receive His message. You can see this throughout the entire Old Testament. When you look and say, why did any of that stuff happen to any of those individuals? Well, it's because through those experiences, the people there contemporary with the events that were taking place could understand who God was. And we, looking back on it with 2020 hindsight, we can see how God was working and moving and how He was setting kind of these, grand metaphors, these like living parables, so to speak, through the people of the Old Testament. And so when Christ comes, that really just continues, is that Christ chooses to use some of these parables so that we can understand lessons in a way that maybe we wouldn't understand it otherwise. I think if you stop and you think for a second, you'll see that we actually do this in our own lives. I mean, this is something that in culture we do. When people have fables and fairy tales and things like that, things where there's neat little sayings and little lessons for us, throughout these little, things that we'll communicate to children or things that we'll watch on TV. Those are nothing more than just parables, things that are kind of veiled in narrative to communicate something important to us. So when you sit here and you look at this very effective way of communicating, you'll end up seeing, once again, those two words that we mentioned over and over again, faith and perseverance. And this is really key. There's a very explicit reason why I keep saying it over and over again. It's because faith, as we've covered in our previous lessons, is the foundation of everything. It is the basis of the church itself. And so it's no wonder that faith becomes a very important key of how God is going to communicate to us. Whenever God's communicating His truth to us through a parable, there is an element of faith that we have to be willing to search for that truth. to actually search for the understanding of what God is communicating to us. Now, before we dive into the parable itself, I want you to look at something that Paul has to say about the importance of faith, to really hammer home why it is necessary for us to engage in some of these, back and forths with the Word, to really search for what God is communicating to us. See how he talks about how faith was pivotal in the lives of so many other individuals leading up to the person of Christ. Okay, so now we've arrived. We're at the point where we understand God communicates in ways that the faithful who persevere can actually receive the truth. And parables is a very, very, very effective way of doing that. So what is this parable trying to teach us? Let's persevere to try to see how this maybe teaches us something about our faith. Well, when you go through here and you look at the meanings, you start seeing that there were individuals that, are basically cast to different types of soil, right? You have some individuals are basically being choked off. You have certain individuals are being ensnared. Certain individuals fall on, or basically just starve, fall on bad soil. And every single one of these has a meaning that Christ reveals to us. And through those, I think what you will find is that we deal with these exact same things today. So through the use of a parable, instead of Christ just turning around and giving his contemporaries the message the way they would directly understand it, we can now see this grander lesson and actually apply it to our lives very, very, very effectively. Because in our own lives, we all know Christians who are like this, right? We all know individuals who get seduced away by the things of Satan, that they basically have this failure of faith, that they just simply can't get on board with the fact that God is who God is. You have individuals who get pulled away by the things of this world. You have individuals who get super excited right off the bat, like, man, I love Jesus. This is super awesome because it's all new, but because there's no depth to their faith, they end up falling away. This is exactly, directly what Christ is talking about in this parable. But because he used a parable, we can now use that as a way to look at our own faith, to evaluate, who are we? How do we act as Christians? Are we one of the seeds that has fallen on good soil? Or are we one of these others that is so common in our world today? In this section of scripture, we do have the big so what. When you look at the result of good seed that has fallen on good soil, it yields good fruit. That is kind of the validation, so to speak, that seed has actually taken root and that it's doing what it's intended to do. That's one of the reasons why, even though a lot of Christians go overboard in terms of looking at your actions and kind of the fruits of your life and everything, there is something to it. We can't overlook it. And sometimes I think in kind of modern, contemporary, more feel-good Christianity, people like to get the actions of their lives and they like to say, well, that really doesn't matter because after all, it's all about love and grace. But what you see is that the natural response of seed that has really grown in that soil of grace is going to be good fruit. And so it doesn't mean that if you don't see good fruit that somebody maybe isn't growing. It doesn't mean that at all. However, if somebody goes their entire life and they never produce any kind of good fruit, then, I think that really begs a question. It really deserves some soul searching. And for us as individuals, we have to stop and say, I don't want to be in that boat. I don't want to be somebody who then starts looking and saying, did any of this mean anything? Because I can't see how it had any impact on how I acted or the things I did or the ways that I served something that was bigger than myself. As a church, there is something for us to take away, and that is that church should be a place that enables people to bear good fruit. That is the entire purpose of the whole thing, is to assist people, to help people grow, to train them so that they can have faith and persevere through this life as they follow God's calling. And in doing that, it should yield good fruit. So long as the church is doing that, hey, I mean, we can sit here and say it may not have this and it may not have that, and I don't prefer these kind of, choice decisions, but the church is doing what it should fundamentally do. But as individuals, there's also something for us to take away, and it is this. We can't sit here and just blame the soil that we feel like we're on. When we have to one day account for the decisions that we've made, for whether we dedicated our lives to Christ, it's not going to suffice to sit here and blame the ground, to sit here and say, well, you know what, I was just put on the wrong ground. There is something that we can do about that. If we find that we are on ground that is going to get trampled, then we need to move out of the way of those things that are going to try to trample us. If those are bad influences in our lives, if those are, things that we feel like we're kind of trapped in that we need to get out of, we need to search out accountability. We need to search out, God's grace. We need to search out whatever it is to get out of the way. If we feel like we're, individuals that maybe are seduced easily by the things of this world, things that may try to ensnare us and prevent us from actually yielding good fruit, then we have to reassess our priorities and to ensure that we can ultimately produce that good fruit. And finally, if we're Christians who are very excited, or maybe at one point in time we were excited and we're not really anymore, then instead of looking at everything else around us and blaming that, maybe we should ask ourselves if maybe we are that seed that sprouted aggressively initially, but not actually having any root, we weren't able to continue. Our job as individuals is to ensure that we are seed that is growing on good soil. That means surrounding ourselves by the right company, by ensuring that we are a part, and not just like a passive part, but we are an active part of a church that is assisting us in growing in our faith and our perseverance. And it means growing in a relationship with God individually, praying, reading the Bible, trying to understand these things so that we can be in a state where we're ready to receive whatever truth it is that God has prepared for us in these pages of the Bible and through whatever He is going to speak to us in our hearts and in our minds as we meditate on who He is and what He has given us in His Word. That's our lesson that I have for today. I hope you're able to get something out of it. Until we can meet again, God bless.